والفرقان الحميد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الأبرار لفي نعيم وإن الفجار لفي جحيم صدق الله العظيم. Alhamdulillah, respected brothers, elders, mothers and sisters, it is with the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are gathered here today in the masjid, being the most beloved of places in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you look at the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which he says, أحب البلاد إلى الله مساجدها وأبغض البلاد إلى الله أسواقها. The context of which it means that in the face of this entire universe, the most beloved of places in the sight of Allah is the places in which His ubudiyyah, His worship is taking place, in which where a banda, a servant and a human being prostrates and puts his head down. Those pieces of land would be considered the most best of places in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the fact that we have defined and established this place as a masjid in which we bow our heads down to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you can consider this as the most beloved of places in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alhamdulillah for that. But in the contrary of that as well, the worst of places in which in the sight of Allah are, if you look at the Arabic word itself, aswaq, it is the plural of suqun. And suq means, and typically if you were to translate this in English, word means bazaar, or shopping center, or a mall, or a place in which people do business. But if we really understood the implications of this word, it would mean places in which the vices and evils are happening in perpetually and in abundance. So any place in which now, typically in those days when people would do shoppings and they would be in the outside place, and they would go to bazaars to do transactions and buy their goods and whatever else, there would be a place in which people, our worldly affairs would be involved. People would not primarily be involved in how they would want to consider their spiritual life, right? So the Prophet ﷺ said that in places in which a person has the ability to be away from being spiritually inclined to, but rather the opposite, in the worldly affairs, there is the higher potential of being involved in sin. So in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, anything that kind of puts you away from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be considered places in which, for example, nowadays we wouldn't consider shopping centers the worst of places. There are other places that are much worse, we know this. But for us to make a deduction, for us to make an analysis, the fact that any places in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's remembrance is of a lesser degree, in which there's more prone to making mistakes of the eyes, making mistakes of the tongue, making mistakes of our dealings, are places in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would consider as the disliked places in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Second point is, my brothers, we're in the day of Jum'ah. Alhamdulillah, every now and then I have to bring this up because وَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَ تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Advices and constant reminder gets our hearts elevated to really understand and get our love to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is that on this day, Yawmul Jum'ah, Allah subhanahu, the significance and the virtues of this day is so grand. And it's so significant that it is on this day, Yawmul Jum'ah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided to even create the whole universe, the existence of which, kun fayakun, right? إِنَّمَا يَقُولُ لَهُ kun fayakun. When the existence of this entire universe Allah created was in the Yawmul Jum'ah. It is on this day, Yawmul Jum'ah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided to create Adam alayhi salatu wassalam, right? It is the day in which Allah created Adam alayhi salam, the very first human species, right? Allah created Adam alayhi salatu wassalam on this day. And it is on this day, Yawmul Jum'ah, Allah decided to take Adam alayhi salatu wassalam and put him into this worldly realm, right? And it was on this day, before he sent into this world, Allah sent Adam alayhi salatu wassalam into this world. When Adam made that mistake, alayhi salatu wassalam, Allah decided to accept it. The tawbah of Adam alayhi salatu wassalam was on this day, Yawmul Jum'ah. It was on this day, Yawmul Jum'ah, Allah decided to reveal the very last of messages that will be revealed to the humankind. It was on this day, Yawmul Jum'ah, Allah decided to reveal the Quran. شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن. It was on a Friday in the month of Ramadan. It was on this day, Yawmul Jum'ah, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell Israfil alayhi salatu wasalam, "Oh Israfil, blow the trumpet, and the world will come to an end." It is on this day, Yawmul Jum'ah, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell everybody will be waking up from their graves and their qabrs, and they will be their heads up, walking to the mahshar, Yawm al-mahshar, the Hashar Maidan as we call it. The plains of mahshar, they will be walking towards, it will be on this day. And finally, it will be on this day when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant all of us entrance into paradise. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. It will be in this day, Yawmul Jum'ah, when Allah will reveal Himself in a wadi, in a valley, in which the believers, when they will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nothing else will matter to them. Jannah will be at their feet, rivers of milk and honey will be for them, but let alone those things, they will be so much awe-inspired, and they'll be looking at the nur of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and nothing else will matter to them. It'll be on this day. And so in other words, the significance of this day holds such weight and value for a Muslim, that even the Prophet ﷺ has told us, a person who performs the Salatul Jum'ah and he remains steadfast and he performs the next week Salatul Jum'ah, in the interim of that week, any minor sins that a person will commit, Allah is so merciful that He is willing to alleviate, eradicate and delete those messages. Those messages of sin, messages of all kinds of vices that can take place within that week, Allah is willing to remove that. Third point. Now that we have established the best of places, we have the state of Iman in our hearts, we are gathered in the day of Jum'ah. We as Muslims, the very first step for us to get entrance into paradise and get all the blessings, which I recited the Quran, the very first verses I recited in front of you. Innal abrara lafi na'im. Innal abrara lafi na'im. Who are the abrar? Right? We've heard this word many times in the Quran. Abrar. In typical English translation, we would say the righteous, the good people, people that are noble, people that have steadfast and practiced all the things that the Quran told him and what the Prophet ﷺ has taught him. But the very first step in order to become a Muslim, my brothers, is to be recognized as a good abrar, as a good righteous individual. It starts with us being truthful and honest. Wallahi, my brothers, Allah decided to choose Muhammad sallallahu alayhi salatu wasalam. For 40 years, this man was capable of such qualities that even his fellow men, his Quraysh, the polytheists who were worshipping the idols, they gave him a title which we all know, Sadiqul Ameen. Now, it is vital and integral for us to understand that Allah decided to choose this man for his da'wah, for his message, so that when the time will come that he will have to tell the same people to worship that one Allah, for which the people, they were worshipping idols for all of their lives, that his words would have to have some weight. He was considered Sadiqul Ameen. That when he opened his mouth, that he was not some ordinary person opening his mouth and inviting towards Allah. This person was Sadiq, he was a truthful person. He was an honest person. And the fact that because of this characteristics and personality traits, when he even then made the da'wah, even then, look at that. These people didn't want to accept Islam. So what does that tell us, my brothers and sisters? The very first step for us to be considered in the eyes of the non-Muslims, that this is a Muslim, is what? It starts with our honesty and our truthfulness. Subhanallah. Forget about others recognizing us as truthful and honest. We can't even trust ourselves. Wallahi, my brothers, it is with a heavy heart I say this. Our own dealings with our own selves, with our own Muslim brothers and sisters, it is not of deception. Honesty and truthfulness has left us, my brothers. It is about time we bring back the beautiful qualities of the Prophet ﷺ, so that in itself can become an automatic invitation for the people to see the beauty of Islam. When we cheat nowadays in our businesses, we cheat in our family, we cheat in inheritance, we cheat in every kinds of ways, we lie and we deceive. The whole stories of things that we have heard in cases of, when we're filing taxes, we're lying. Very basic things in which we as Muslims are needed to do, we find lacking ourselves into. And then we wonder why the Muslims are being tainted, why are we going through such trials and tribulations? It starts within ourselves, my brothers. The Reformation starts within ourselves. The very first step to Reformation is what? is acknowledgement and confessing that I have something wrong in me, isn't it? The very first step to reformation, to correct yourself, to cleanse ourselves is to what? To acknowledge and confess that I have these weaknesses in me and I need to work towards perfecting these. And there's so many examples. Like recently I've dealt with a specific incident myself, my brothers. Most of us that are live in Long Island, we deal with tenants. SubhanAllah. What stories we've heard. And we tend to normally give Muslims priority. In other words, we want Muslims in our homes so they can be good and they can have good dealings. But SubhanAllah, the dealings that we have with our own Muslim brothers and sisters, they are first to deceive you and they're first to lie in your faces. And then we wonder why we don't want to give to the non-believers. And wallahi, if you see the current behavior of these people, you will see how sad it is. And I'm sorry if I'm coming out very blunt, but this is about the truth and these are the facts, and we need to fix ourselves. Wallahi, my brothers, if you look at the qualities of the Sahaba, if you look at the qualities of our pious predecessors, they were so much considerate of not of just their actions, but the impact of their actions on others. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran that equally every good that you will do, equally you will have the best of things in the akhirah. Innal abrara lafi na'im. And the Quranic so beautifully Allah mentions in the Quran. Innal abrara lafi na'im. The beauty and the virtues of those who are actually honest and did their dealings honestly. A lot of times we go to the shops, my brothers, they'll ask for, somebody, the buyer will ask for a deal. Can you please reduce the price? What will they say? I'm only making $1 profit, my brothers. I bought it for this much, I'm only making $1. But here he bought it for $10 and he's now trying to make 100% profit. Where's the dealings, my brothers? Simple things. If we are not honest in the more fine, the little things, how are we going to be honest in the larger things in life? It starts within us, my brothers. But what the Quran tells, the true people that actually were honest, even into the most minute levels, in the most finite, in the most smallest degrees of matters in life, when they were honest, innal abrara lafi na'im, they will be surrounded with na'im, of blessings upon blessing. Ala al-ara'iki yanzurun, and they will be reclining in couches. Ara'ik in the Arabic language means couch, but it's not just some basic couch you will see. It's not from IKEA. Some very nice couch which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give these individuals, and the implications of this verse, they will be reclining. They will be reclining. Yanzurun. The word nadar doesn't mean to just see. Nadar means to stare at something. So they will be reclining and they will be staring at the beauties, the ni'mats which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be giving them. That normally in this world when we see something, right, we stare at something, we want to get closer to it. So the implication of this verse is they don't have to get closer to it, they'll be reclining. And they will see all the ni'mats around them and they will choose, I want this and I want that. Subhanallah bihamdi, subhanallah al-azim. Little things makes all the difference in akhirah. We want Jannah, but there's a price to pay in order to get that, my brothers. It's not, yes, there are prerequisites, fundamental things that we have to do in order to get entrance into paradise. But to get the most highest of elements in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, في مقعد صدق عند مليك مقتدر. To get that VIP seat in the court of Allah, next to Allah. SubhanAllah, when we want to imagine where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ سَبْعَ سَمَاوَاتٍ طِبَاقًا, isn't it? Layers upon layers, Allah created the heaven. And that's only but the first heaven. Allah created 7 heavens. The first heaven is, and subhanAllah, I don't want to get into the details of which today the scientists are saying, we're living in a black hole, Allahu Akbar. If you look at the galaxies, and the 2/3 of the galaxies are revolving in a certain direction, and that 1/3 is revolving in another direction, tells us that we're kind of spiraling into another thing. In other words, universes upon universes, the magnificence and the grandeur of Allah's creation, it's so grand that the 7 heavens is only the first heaven is only what we see. The second heaven, in which we see the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, the different heavens, he met the different prophets, isn't it? Isra al-Mi'raj, have you forgotten the story? Through the Buraq and the wormholes and portals through which he went. We try to explain in scientific words, but technically what that means is Allah decided to take His beloved Habib through the different cosmos to see the different Jannahs and the different heavens, the different prophets, Anbiya alayhim salatu wasalam. After this, the second heaven, the third heaven, the fourth heaven, the fifth heaven, the sixth heaven, and the seventh heaven, we have Sidratul Muntaha, the locust tree. Nothing else can surpass after that, isn't it? Even Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam cannot go past after that. And then you have what? Allahu la ilaha illahu الحي القيوم لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض من ذا الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه إلا بما شاء وسع كرسيه السماوات والأرض. Allah's kursi, my brothers and sisters, you can't even imagine the grandeur of Allah, who Allah is. The kursi will be on top of the heavens. And the kursi, and top of the kursi is when we have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So those of us who want that VIP seat, you can only imagine how grandeur that is. And it starts with us, my brothers. Everybody has that potential. Every single one of us starts with me. We have the potential. And this is exactly the purpose of our life. And that is it. Everything else is just accessories. Everything else we see in this world is accessories. The main objective of our life is to get that VIP seat next to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah, my brothers, the Prophet ﷺ gave us the formula. He gave us how to achieve that. For indeed he was, إِنَّكَ لَعَلَىٰ خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. Allah vouches in the Quran for this man. O Muhammad, you are ala khuluqin azim. The word azim is normally used for Allah. When we go to ruku', Subhana Rabbi al-Azim. Allah is saying, O Muhammad, your khuluq, your characteristics and your personality, your traits are what? Azim. And he was a human being. He was not an angel. He was a regular person. It started even as before his nubuwwat for 40 years, what kind of person he was. There was a reason why Allah chose this man. There's a reason why he was chosen even before Adam could be created. Isn't it? Hadith, I was created even when Adam was between the soil and the water. I was already created. Allah already wanted me. So he had to be the best, the exemplary traits and exemplary characteristics. He had to have that. And subhanAllah, we have such a beautiful example in this religion. We have such a beautiful role model. And yet we decide to go the other way. Well, my brothers, let this be an incentive for us to get closer to the Prophet ﷺ. Let this be an incentive for us to fix ourselves, our weaknesses. Let's do some soul searching. Where is our weaknesses? Where do we fall? And where is the fact that I am not walking and people thinking of me, I'm a Muslim? My name shouldn't be the reason that people call me a Muslim. It is my characteristics, how I deal in my school environment. It is my characteristics, how I do dealings with my co-workers and work. It is my dealings, how I deal with one another in our family matters. All these things, my brothers, are quite integral for our beautifying our iman. Iman, when a person beautifies these things, his iman increases automatically. And then when they will hear the verses of the Quran, wajilat qulubuhum. When they hear the words of the Quran, their heart starts trembling because they have already beautified and corrected themselves, and they're in the mission to do so. It is not happening overnight. It doesn't happen overnight. The Prophet ﷺ had to do for 40 years, only then he got nubuwwat. Allahu Alam, why the 40 years why that number? But we need to perfect. That's why they say that the Sahaba, they perfected their iman for 10 years before they started doing da'wah. They corrected themselves. Islah, as they call that terminology, islah. They made islahun nafs. They corrected the nafs, they corrected the ego, they tamed their ego. They suppressed their ego, they suppressed their nafs. They know very well, they knew very well what temptations that could harm their souls. They knew very well that the earthly body is forever calling towards evil. Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam said the same thing. وَمَا أُبَرِّئُ نَفْسِي إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمَّارَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ. That, oh my Lord, do not leave me by to myself. Yusuf is saying what? Do not leave me to myself, for indeed the shaitan and my nafs and my ego is always propagating towards the evil. For if you leave me, O Allah, I will be tempted, O Allah, do not leave me. For indeed a true believer, Allah never leaves them. Because why? They're consciously aware of Allah. Allah, a true believer, he is literally making dhikr the 24 hours in a day. He's a true believer, he's truly making ibadat 24 hours a day. Because he's consciously aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His tongue is moist with the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Subhanallah bihamdi, subhanallah azim. Two very small words, but it is so heavy. Subhanallah bihamdi, subhanallah azim. Get acquainted with the dhikr in your tongues. This is the last hadith of Bukhari Sharif. Two words, hadith. Subhanallah bihamdi, subhanallah azim. And it's very easy to say, but it holds so much weight in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this dhikr in itself will revive an individual, will make him alive. And another hadith the Prophet says what? The difference between a dead and alive is dhikr, a person who is consciously aware. Dhikr doesn't mean subhanallah, alhamdulillah. Dhikr means constantly in his brain he knows that my Allah is watching me. That my Allah is watching me. May Allah give us the ability, whatever has been said today, to take this message to all the other brothers and sisters that were gathered here today. For indeed we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to aspire, to inspire others before we can expire. Barakallahu lana wa lakum fil Qur'an wa nafa'ana wa iyyakum bil ayati wa dhikr al hakim. Astaghfirullah li wa lakum wa lisa'il muslimin fastaghfiruhu innahu huwal ghafurur rahim.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
الحمد لله نستعينه وأستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له. ونشهد أن سيدنا مولانا محمدًا عبده ورسوله أرسله بالحق بشرًا ونذيرًا بين يدي الساعة. من يطع الله ورسوله فقد رشد ومن يعصيهما فإنه لا يضر إلا نفسه ولا يضر الله شيئا. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الأبرار لفي نعيم على الأرائك ينظرون تعرف في وجوههم نضرة النعيم. بارك الله لنا ولكم في القرآن العظيم ونفعنا وإياكم بالآيات والذكر الحكيم. استغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله نستعينه واستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن سيدنا مولانا محمدًا عبده ورسوله أرسله بالحق بشيرًا ونذيرا بين يدي الساعة. من يطع الله ورسوله فقد رشد، وما يعصيهما فإنه لا يضر إلا نفسه ولا يضر الله شيئا. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك، وصل على المؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات، وبارك على محمد وأزواجه وذريته. قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: أرحم أمتي بأمتي أبو بكر، وأشدهم في أمر الله عمر، وأصدقهم حياء عثمان، وقضاهم علي، وفاطمة سيدة نساء أهل الجنة، والحسن والحسين سيدا شباب أهل الجنة، وحمزة أسد الله وأسد رسوله. اللهم اغفر للعباس وولده مغفرة ظاهرة وباطنة لا تغادر ذنبا، رضوان الله تعالى عليهم من كل الصحابة أجمعين. الله في أصحابي لا تتخذوهم غرضا من بعدي، فمن أحبهم بحبي أحبهم، ومن أبغضهم ببغض بغضهم، وخير أمتي قرني ثم الذين يلونهم ثم الذين يلونهم. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى، وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي، يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. فاذكروني أذكركم واشكروا لي ولا تكفرون. أقيموا الصلاة.